where did the Shackbuilder project start? Was it a dream? Was it a passion? How did it come about?
Thank you very much, Lynette. It's a very interesting question. It actually started a very long time ago I think in 1995 when I visited informal settlement in the R. And then in 2000, I decided that I want to work with the most vulnerable children that you can get in the world. Of course, at that time, I was interested in children living in war-torn countries like Syria at that time. And then I decided that I want to do work locally in South Africa. And then I was introduced to this boy in 2000. And he was diagnosed for ADHD. And then I asked him about his background. And he said, "Uncle, I'm staying in a bush in a hockey." And that was the day when I decided to go and visit his place. And then I entered that shack for the first time. And then I have realized this is the work that I want to do for the rest of my life.
How did you start, though? It's one thing to have a dream and a passion, but to action it, it's quite a completely different thing.
Yeah, I think for the first 3 years, it was just to familiarize myself with the setting because, you were trained as a psychologist to work with individuals within a clinical setting or within an office. And now you have shifted into a more broader community setting, and you weren't really trained to work in these settings. So it took me literally 3 years to really understand the dynamics because it was a foreign place for me. It was an unknown territory that I entered, and I think I was confronted with the power dynamics in the informal settlement because I was introducing myself. No one wanted to work with me. They were very skeptical about my motives. And then also in that specific informal settlement, my name and the nearby drug lord had the same name. So they were also confused about, I was introducing Quinton, and so people thought that it's the drug lord that wants to start with the projects. And I was confused about, because I was quite young in this field, and I had to build relationships with the people. Luckily for me, I started with the Rastafarians. So for 3 years, I had these two guys with the name of Vlam and Trane, and they became my mentors in the informal settlement because it was quite densely populated. It was small, but there were a lot of people, a lot of shacks. And most of the times I were overwhelmed by these experiences, the poverty, the shacks, the smoke, the pigs, the lack of food. And it really took me 3 years to get to the point where I said, okay, I want to start a project. So I was actually moving with the system, trying to understand the system for 3 years because it was quite complex. And that's why I later on started to specialize in complexity theory, because complexity is overlapping subsystems. So you don't know who's in control, you don't know who's the leadership, you don't know where are the organizations, you don't know where are the boundaries, and there are a lot of boundaries in the informal settlement. And so it took me 3 years to decide that this is what I want to do. And I'm going to start with the children. And we actually started with 800 children. And we were running play groups. And then I discovered there's a lot of trauma in the informal settlement. And with 800 kids, most of them suffered with ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of the kids lost their parents, and there's a lot of alcohol abuse and gender-based violence at that time. And so I was really overwhelmed. And then I decided I want to focus on the children and offer programs for the children. And then because I was at that time at the university, I also started to place my students in the informal settlements as a practical. So they were also overwhelmed. And then later on, I started to place my master students, the psychology students, in the informal settlement. And
What
then
university was
after
that? Sorry to interrupt you.
the,
Which?
the University of Stellenbosch. And then after 2 years, the university discovered that I was working as a psychologist in the informal settlement. And Professor Brunk, the rector, he called me into his office. He said it's very strange that a psychologist was supposed to be in a clinical setting working in an informal setting. He thought it was quite revolutionary. And I was really out of my depth at that time, trying to understand the dynamics, where to start, how to start, where to focus on. And then that work continued almost for 15 years in the informal settlement.
When you decided to get involved, literally get your hands dirty and start building homes, what was that process like? You had to build trust for about 3 years plus. And when you're introducing these new passions, these new projects, how did you go about doing that?
You know, I worked for 15 years in the informal settlement before I started to build any shack. I think that's important. Before that, those 15 years I can actually categorize in three phases. The first 5 years was just playing with the kids, doing outreach in terms of blankets and food and programs with the kids and help them with the trauma. The second phase was quite an interesting one. Then I discovered the shack fires in the informal settlement. And I think it was in 2007, 5 years after that, where I was called by the leaders to come and see what happened. And then 3 bodies were lying outside this shack that caught fire during the night. And I went to the funeral and sat with a mother. And it was my first encounter with children that lost their lives in a shack fire. And I mean, the bodies were lying there. You could smell the bodies, and it was quite traumatic. And then I started to develop a candle, very interesting. I call it the candle of hope, where I went to the University of Civil Engineering and all these professors and asked them, can you help me to build a safer candle? So I devised the candle with a wire around the candle. So if it falls, then there's some protection. And I distributed, I think, over 500 or 1,000 of these candles of hope just to prevent shack fires. And then I also worked with Rosenbauer, the fire truck manufacturing company from Austria. And we came up with another system to prevent shack fires. And I helped them with making sure that the material are not flammable. So then I started to talk to them about your places are unsafe. There's a lot of flammable material, plastic and tires. I think the most dangerous thing that you can have is the tires and the plastic and the wood. And so the last 5 years was really about helping them to prevent shack fires. And then the flood came. I've seen a lot of rain in the informal settlement, but never like the 7th of June 2017, where I walked in the informal settlement. I actually, a day before the storm happened, I drove into the informal settlement and tell the people this terrible storm is coming. They're going to close the schools tomorrow. And if they need help or if there are any accidents, they must just call me in the middle of the night. And then the next morning, I went into, and it was just flooded. It was the strongest wind in Cape Town that I've ever seen. I think it was around about 140, 145 kilometers. That was the wind that actually caused the Knysna fires in 2017. And more people died in the informal settlements than people died in the Knysna fires. And so I went into that, and it was just devastation all over. Roofs were removed, and I walked in, and people were panicking, and they were frustrated and angry. And then I went into this house, and then I realized I cannot tell them any other stories or pray for them or whatever. I must do something physical. And then I told them, I'm going to build you a shack. And when I leave this place and I come back, then we will start. I didn't have a clue. There was no manual. I didn't have the equipment. I didn't have tools. I just have this desire that I'm going to help these people because of the devastation that they experience. And then I went on the radio and I explained to the people that I'm going to build a shack. And then someone phoned and say, can we speak to the shack builder? And so
Wow.
I was surprised. I said, no, 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 I'm not a shack builder. I'm a psychologist that want to help people. Second person phone and say, can we speak to the shack builder? Third person phone and say, can we speak to the shack builder of South Africa? And then the radio journalist said, oh, today the psychologist has turned into the shack builder. And then I went back to the informal set and said, people, they call me now the shack builder. I must still build them a shack. So it was a developmental process. It was almost like a trajectory.
Mm.
Um, it was not a strategic decision. It was just me building on another phase. And then I think it was the culmination of a lot of processes since 2002 up till 2017.
I know that you have international support and funders, but to someone who's foreign to the concept of a shack or a shack builder, how do you explain an informal settlement that is quite known in South Africa as a terminology? But how do you explain to them what a shack is and what an informal settlement is?
Yeah, there are various definitions because the international definition is, I don't like the word, they call it the slum.
Oh,
So people are talking about slum dwellers. I think in South Africa, we're talking about shack dwellers. Some people use the word informal dwellers. And then they have various definitions and international definitions, but basically it's people who are illegally occupying land. That is a shack dweller. They have occupied it illegally, and we have categories in South Africa because of this massive problem in South Africa. It is not a formalized structural setting. It doesn't have running water. It is just a plot of land, and the people don't have ownership of the land. And I think that is very important. So the moment when they enter the land and they stay there for a certain time, then it means they are actually illegal. They are illegal occupants.
mm,
And until they go to the municipality and they register and negotiate and say, we are now a group of people, we're going to stay here. So register us as an informal settlement so that we can give basic services like water and sanitation. But that's a very long process because some people, they remove the people, but basically the definition is people are illegally occupants in that land. Now, what happened in South Africa is that there's a historical development regarding informal settlements. People stayed for years and years in the bush, and they didn't even know it was an informal settlement. It was just them staying in the bush. And I think that is important to understand because these people were socially, psychologically, structurally marginalized. They were pushed to the periphery of society. And most of these people, that's why they're staying there. They're not staying there because of a housing crisis. They're staying there because they have certain developmental needs. They have certain intellectual needs. They went through serious crises in their lives. And most of them are economically marginalized. They don't have work. They don't even have IDs. And they just staying there somewhere on a plot illegally, and they are now classified as an informal settlement. But I think what is interesting is that South Africa after 2000, no, after 1994 has decided on this big ambitious project to build houses for people. I think it is the biggest housing implementation project in the world, more than 3 million houses. But despite all the government interventions, you can see that the problem was much more bigger.
mm,
And because of the DOM pass in the past, people couldn't move from province to province. You were prevented. If you're staying in the Eastern Cape, you must stay there. And so people couldn't move. And there was no inward mobility really happening. After 1994, people got permission and they can move freely, and they were just flooding the cities. And the informal settlements is also part of this urbanization drive. I just read an article yesterday about how large the percentage was of Chinese people living in rural areas. Now everyone flocked to the cities, and they have big problems in terms of providing housing. And I think we underestimated really the size of the problem in 1994 on different levels. I think on different levels, we underestimated the size of the problem. But in terms of housing, we underestimated, and three factors are really interesting. It's the urbanization drive. It is the lack of funding in terms of providing houses for people, and then population growth. I mean, we are now nearing 60 million people, and the rate of population growth and the rate of building houses doesn't correlate. So it is a structural issue. And that's why I always believe that if you want to solve it, it's not just money that you need, but you need a very good policy, which I think it's lacking at the moment in South Africa.
As the Shackbuilder project, what are the resources that you require? What makes the project work? And where are the shortcomings and the challenges?
Yeah, I think what happened is that I think the advantage that we had, and it was the fact that we call it a emic experience, an insider view. And I think that is what differentiates us from a lot of architects and engineers and people who are designing neighborhoods, is that what we've done and what we've done differently is we've traveled into the houses. We experience firsthand the state and the nature of the shack, why it is a dilapidated, and why people are living in squalor, and the enormous impact on the health of the people. For instance, if you look at the height of our structure, it is 2.75. The building code said it must be 2.4 meters. We're building 2.7 meters. And the reason why we're building 2.7 meters is that people are sleeping on a double bed. And if the bed is too high, they will touch the roof. So you want a proper space between the bed and the roof, because all of these smells, they're going upwards and they just hanging there. So what happened is that we develop a very standardized structure. And what my architectural friend told me, we have architectural integrity, which means we have a proper front door, we have proper windows. We have a slope roof. The material that we're using is very strong. And then very important, what differentiates us even from a concrete building, is the insulation that we have. It's insulated. When it's cold, then it's warmer. When it's hot, it's cooler inside. And most of these shacks in the country, Lynette, they don't have insulation. That's why the temperature goes beyond 45, 50 degrees. We've measured in the informal settlement during the winter, it's extremely cold, but we insulate it. And then when you look at the concrete blocks that people are building, it's so weak. It is what they call 2 MPa. It's a very weak concrete block. There's a lot of it's getting wet, and people are getting sick because of these concrete blocks. And that's why our structure can compete with international standards. We brought the master students from the Norwegian Science and Technology University, and they were dumbfounded about our structural integrity especially for the frame that we're using. We're building a solid frame. It is not just steel that we're using and sheets that we're using. It's a solid wooden frame They say it's the equivalent of Norwegian wooden framing, and then that's
Wow.
the strength. And because we building what we call squares in, and we're building different techniques in to strengthen it. So if a hurricane must come, I think our structure will stand very strong. But what happened, and to come back to your question, is that the challenges that we have is that we would like to build it on a big scale. We don't have the finances, we don't have the capacity, but we know we have the know-how how to deliver a solid, healthy, secure shack within a day. When we started off, it took us 5 days. And then I looked at our operational processes, how to reduce the time. We've trained the guys differently. We increased our techniques differently. And now we can build a two-room, 80 square meters in one day. So in terms of service delivery, how quick we can now build 50 shacks within a month,
Wow.
because we have the know-how and we've trained the young people. And I think in South Africa, people still believe, and that's the challenge. People still believe in brick and mortar. It's still one of those English colonial stuff that we are facing, that you must build with brick and mortar. When you look at Scandinavian countries, the US, Canada, they're building with wooden structures, and it's still a very strong. And every time when you build a wooden structure, people say, what about the fire?
Mm.
I mean, there's a lot of materials that you can use. So we are very excited. And you know, in this so short space of time, we've built over 120 shacks for people. Can you believe it?
Wow. I'm sure that you're quite proud if you look back at where you started and where you're now. But where do you find your materials and the funding for these shacks to build it, and the labor? Surely those are all costs and that you have to filter in.
Yeah, what we've decided, because when we started, the cost of a shack two room was 9,000. Now, because of inflation, it's still a shock to see how the prices have increased. We have done now 3 shacks recently, and I was shocked when the guys told me that the per line costs now about 90 rand. I said, no, man, that's wrong with that, because when I started, it was 25 rand. It's now 90 rand one per line. Um, so we still make use of private donors. We don't get big funders that come along. We still have the people that make personal donations, and I also make donations in the organization. But what we've realized, Lynette, and I think that is important, is people in these squalor conditions, who have waited for 30 years and 40 years for a house. They have a distrust in government.
Mm.
They believe it's just going to be another promise. We've built in Subatsfontein, and that elderly couple said that they were on the list. Their names were placed on the list in 1994 when Nelson Mandela was released, and
Wow.
they were sleeping in a dilapidated shack, on the floor, on a mattress. They were waiting for 30 years for a house. And then we came and we decided to build them one shack. It changed that entire community. Just one shack in the entire community, and people started to believe that things can happen for them. And then we realized what we want to do, and that's why our shacks are yellow, so that people can see there's a visible transformation, there's a change. It's not just a fairy tale,
Mm.
or a promise. And people will tell you that the color yellow will fade. I had a long discussion with a professor in Norway. He said, you don't paint a house yellow, it will fade. I said, yes, but for the first 3 months, they can see there's a visible change. People start to believe. It happened in Khayelitsha. We built for Papa Nati there, and people say, are you really going to build? And they didn't believe us until we built the yellow shack. And the hopes and the aspirations of people were just rising, and they believed in us, and they give us permission to work. I think the place where we built, we felt the safest. And that's why I told someone this afternoon, it's not about shack building. It's a deeper process.
Yeah, but it's
It
also
is about.
restoring people's dignity and the humanity that you give someone, and just establish the trust, the hope of a better tomorrow, a safer place.
Lynette, the more I think about the name, the shack builder, I'm thinking about the um, the epistemology of the word, the shack builder. When you look at the images of a dilapidated shack and the squalor conditions, people are stripped from their humanity, and 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 it means they feel they are less human. They feel they are subhuman. And then you come and you say, we're going to break this thing down. We're going to build you a new thing with a cement floor, with windows. Then it's not even the restoration of human dignity. Is you busy reconstructing human dignity, because the psychological well-being is still tied to that bad experiences of feeling less human. And now you're starting to disrupt that experience and that emic experience. And so when you build something new, it's very difficult for them to express how they feel, because they don't have the. If I build for you, you will give me the best words because you articulate, you have the right words. But these people, they don't have the right words. They don't know how to. They will say thank you, but they thank you, it's a very simple word, but it has a deep meaning, because they know that something inside of them has happened. Like Opa and Oma. Oma passed away over the weekend. She could sleep on a bed in her own room. We even donated a bed for Oma. That's another project that we started. A bed, just to think about you sleeping in a house without a bed. We've started this project, Homes Without Beds. And because people are sleeping on the floor, and a lot of these children, they don't suffer from ADHD, they suffer from insomnia. They can't concentrate. And people misdiagnose them in the school with ADHD. Everyone has ADHD. I think it's insomnia, it's PTSD, but that's another debate. But now you build them. They sleep on the floor. They sleep 7 people, 6 people on one double bed. Now you give them a bed where they can sleep, where they can have rest, where they can feel they are human. And as you said, now it is the reconstruction and the rebuilding of who they are. And that's why when I think about all the violence and the crime on the Cape Flats and South Africa, just ask yourself, where does those people sleep? What are the living conditions? What are their lived realities? And then you will realize that the root cause is people who feel they are not human beings. They're treated like less human.
What has this brought to your life? How has it enhanced you as a person who came from the outside, who was in fact an outsider, to be such an integral part of growth, of allowing peace of mind, of creating a safe space, because that's what we all want. How has this changed your life?
When you trained as a psychologist, you let me say, when you're at the graduation ceremony and they say masters in psychology, you walk out and you tell everyone, you can't wait. People ask you that you are a psychologist. Oh, you go to functions and hello, how are you? And what's your name? And you can't wait. And then you ask the question, so what are you doing? No, I'm doing this and that. And then because you actually want them to ask you the question, what are you doing? And then you say, I'm a psychologist. They say, oh, you understand. You understand the human psyche. Some people say, oh, you can read my mind. I'm not sure that psychologists can read other people's minds. But it's about this thing of understanding. You would train that you have a level of proficiency in terms of understanding of the human psyche. What happened with me is that the more deeper I walked, it's like the abyss of poverty. The more I realized I don't understand. And that was a constant feeling. The moment when I think, okay, a broken window, this is the smell, this is the rats, and this is that. Okay, now I understand. Then the next check, you will just get something, and then there's a completely new phenomenon. And that's why I say that I don't even use the word poverty anymore. It is a multifaceted dynamic that is playing where I had to constantly stand still and realize. And then I realized, but I actually don't know. I don't know. And I don't know because of the multifaceted dimension of this experience that people have. I will never forget. I walked into a house, and this lady gave birth to this beautiful girl, and then the next day I went back to the place and to take some clothes, and they said no, but the mother sold the child. Um, and I said, but why? And they said, but the mother was struggling with breastfeeding. I said, but why? And there was a lot of whys in my walk and my in my discovery. That's besides the human trafficking. That's besides the human trafficking that I experienced. And and what happened is that I became more sensitive on a much broader and deeper level about the human needs of people. The other day, I was standing in an office and I was talking to this lady that was cleaning, and I said to her, "Can you allow me to look at your feet?" She said, she smiled. She said, "Why?" I said, "When you enter the door, I saw your shoes. It's broken." And she said, "I picked it up when I saw you because you were looking at my feet." I mean, when you're a psychologist, you were trained to look at the soul, and and you have all these theories. You have a thousand theories, and you sound clever, and you impress people with Freudian psychology and advanced Freudian psychology, and you have all these therapeutic models that you have, and you are the expert until you walk into a place that I call my journey into the abyss of poverty, where I realize I don't understand. And it makes you more sensitive about people. And I must be honest with you, most of the evenings I couldn't sleep, most of the evening, because I was traumatized because I felt powerless. Because it is not just one person, it is thousands of people. Um, I met this lady in the informal settlement because I was always wondering about social exclusion and social marginalization, and why people are ending up at the informal settlement. So I met this lady. I mean, she lived in one of the worst shacks that I've ever seen in my life. When we broke down the shack, even a cobra came out. I mean, it was just
Wow.
horrible. And then I listened to a story, and she said she came from a very abusive relationship, intimate partner violence, etc., etc. But and she was very emotional because, I mean, she's been raped several times. But she said the worst thing that actually happened to her is that every morning her partner took her to the train station, and then he will bind her, attach her to the train tracks, and she could literally hear the train coming, and then she would scream, and then people will hear screaming, and then they will come and they will loosen up. And that happened almost for 2 or 3 years, where her husband just tied her to and then she decided that what she's going to do is she's going to stay in the bush, and she got a place actually in the pigsty. And that was the safest place where she stayed. And when she was talking, she was just crying uncontrollably. And we built a shack, and I mean, it was just tears. And then afterwards, she told me the story about our husband tied her to the train tracks. And then I discovered while I was listening to a story that there are different levels of trauma. You get process trauma, you get critical incident trauma, you get simultaneous trauma, and then you get this severe trauma where it is just multiple. And that's why she's using drugs. She said the only way to deal with it, with those horrible images, and is when she is on marijuana. That is the only thing that really helped her. So as I said in the beginning, it's like a journey into the abyss of poverty, and then you discover these people and their stories and what they went through. And then you realize, but what they've experienced is multiple complex trauma. And then I've written a document about multiple complex trauma because it is so severe. It is multiple incidents. It is not just the loss of a mother or abuse. It is complex. It is, and it happened over a very long period. And that's why these people ended up in the bush, in a shack. And then I realized, but I want to develop a theory, and that is the Maslow dehumanization theory. Because what Maslow is actually telling us is you have the first level, which is your security needs, your belonging, your housing needs, and then you move up to the highest, the esteem needs. But for these people, they don't have a proper house, they don't have a proper secure place, they don't have food, they don't have clothes. And then I realized, but they're going downwards into what I call the dehumanization cycle. So Maslow is talking about moving upwards, and these people are moving downwards. And then I realized, but these people have serious problems with dehumanization. And what you have to do is you have to build them a structure, you have to give them food, you have to build them a proper house. And then afterwards, you only can start to work on the psychological damage that they've experienced over the years. And that's why I really believe, Lynette, in South Africa, we have a lot of people with serious and severe complex trauma. It's multiple layers. And that's why we have this big problem with violence and gender-based violence, because it stems from complex trauma, and it is unresolved complex trauma. So they haven't been to a psychologist or a social worker because it's too painful to revisit those experiences. So that's some of the things that I've discovered and experienced. And as I said, the more I journeyed in this abyss of poverty, abyss of dehumanization, the more I realized that I don't understand.
Do
And I
you
will never
believe,
understand.
speaking to understanding, that there is literally those shack dwellers, people that live in the informal settlements, and those that live in urban or metropolitan areas, that divide is so huge that you really don't connect in any way, because the understanding of that type of suffering, that type of pain, that that you grow up with day in, day out, that sense of not knowing where you belong, that feeling of insecurity, of being on the outskirts, that's a bridge that you'll never be able to cross.
Yeah, I think it is. There's a word, there's schism, SHISCM. There's a schism, there's a gap. And that's why I think you have to start first with the outer layer, and that is the infrastructural development, before you can start with, because you can start with psychological healing, and the people are going back into those squalor conditions, and so you need a systemic intervention, and a systemic intervention starts with a structure, a proper structure. I can recall this lady. She had a disabled boy, and during the flooding, um, she discovered he almost drowned because he was crawling on the floor, and I mean the height of the water was about 30 centimeters, and she almost lost this boy. And then after we've built them a new shack, you could see in the behavior of this disabled boy, because I think he struggled with selective mutism. He couldn't speak. He only spoke certain times. And then after we built him a new one, so you can send him to a therapist, or you can send him to a occupational therapist or a speech therapist, but the structural conditions of the people you need to address. And that's why I believe that if I listen to these politicians after the elections and before the elections, it is just a lot of blah, 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 nothing saying, there's no substance, there's no real challenges and real issues that they're going to address. But I believe that if you want to restore the dignity, which is a fundamental constitutional right, then you have to start with infrastructure. If you look at the Chinese model, if you look at the Singaporean model, if you look at, they're trying it now in Kigali, in Rwanda. If you look at all these democracies and emerging nations and economies, then you could see that they've started with the infrastructure. And then people talk about infrastructure, but they don't do infrastructure in this country.
What are the 4 pillars that the shack building project is built on?
I think it's about equality, it's about equity, it's about humanity, and then it is about restorative justice. There's a very strong element of restorative justice. I believe that it is a fundamental right that people must have a decent dwelling, because your first foundation is a house. Your first foundation is not a school. People say, yes, people must get education. You can have the best and highly intelligent people and with a high IQ and put them in a dilapidated shack. And then you will see how they will just slump into dehumanization. They will start to, because first of all, they won't have the necessary vitamin intake, and they will have vitamin D deficiency. They will struggle with stunting. They will suffer from malnutrition, and they can't concentrate. And just because of the lack of vitamins, they will have concentration problems. And that's why I believe that if you want to make sure that you have a healthy and prosperous country, make sure that you have a solid house. And then from a solid house, then you can work on a value system. And then very important, you can start to look at a quality education.
Is the work that you do, is it mainly in the Western Cape?
No, we've branched out, Lynette. We received the ENCA Heroes Award. It's a very funny thing, the Heroes Award, because the more I think about the Heroes Award, and I have a long discussion with people, and I still differ about the name the hero, because I'm not sure whether I'm a hero. But what was interesting is we have built 5 shacks, and then people say, okay, this is now a hero. And then I realized, but how can you build 5 shacks and people call you a hero? And then I realized that the service delivery of this country is so low that even if you build 1 shack,
It's a
people
huge.
perceive you as a hero because people are waiting, and it's a huge achievement. I went to Gauteng to build 1 shack, and the people said they're waiting there for almost 17 years. Nothing has been built. If I just build 1 shack, then I will get an overperform at the municipality. So within that context, so we received a lot of requests from the Eastern Cape. We've received a lot of requests from Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and then Zambia, and of course Namibia, Zambia, and Tanzania. And but
Wow.
we're physically built in 4 different provinces. We built in Western Cape, Eastern Cape. We've built in the Northern Cape, and we have a very big footprint in the Northern Cape. And I know why people struggle in the Northern Cape, because of these long geographical distances. I mean, just to get the transport there, it's between 50 and 60,000 rand to get it there. That's besides the accommodation. So that's what we're doing. And what people are also doing is they look at our model of how we build, and the windows, because that is actually how you reduce tuberculosis and all the other diseases, is to have very good ventilation. People can die of poor ventilation. During COVID, if there's no good ventilation, they can get all these different viruses. So we have now a national footprint in the country, and people are asking for our model, and we send the model, and they access the way we build, and we also support people by giving them the material. We buy the material on that side, and we get people that can build. So we have a national footprint, and I really hope one day that we will also build up in Africa, because I mean, I was last year, the year before, in Namibia and Tanzania, and I mean, the squalor conditions that these people are living in. And you know, what is interesting is that it seems people survive. It's very difficult for them, but they try to survive in these living conditions. And that's why we have the Shackbuilder. The Shackbuilder is not just about building, it's about raising a flag, it's about shouting on the mountaintop and telling people that people are suffering. People are suffering, and when we can do something about it, it's not a wicked problem, as we call it in complexity science. It is a solvable problem. We can solve it. We just need the political will to solve the problem.
How big is your team currently?
You know, it's very interesting because our team, there's a lot of turnover in the team. When we train them and they can build a shack and they know how to cost the shack, and then they go and join Uncle Jimmy, and then they work with Uncle Jimmy. So you have what we do is we've started the backyard varsity. The backyard varsity is the place where we train young people, give them the necessary skill, how to build, how to design. We make use of design thinking. We simplify the model, and so it varies. Sometimes we have 10, sometimes we have 7, sometimes the entire teams get a very good job, and then they get a better salary. And I don't have a problem with it, because I believe that the Shackbuilder has become an incubator now, incubator of training people, young people, skill them, and make sure that they become entrepreneurs. So we have a full-time team. It varies between 5 and 7, and then we have a part-time team. Sometimes it varies to 10, 15 people. And sometimes when we build a bigger project, then we have 20 people. So it varies on a part-time basis. And and because we are dependent on donors. But what is interesting is that you can see the transformation of these people after they get the training, and they know how to build, and they just passionate, and you know, what differentiate them from a lot of other trainings is that they can cost the material. They know how to make the profit. They know how they can put up their margins, etc., etc. And we've started now with a few schools. We've trained, I think, last year over 200 young people. This year we're aiming for 250 people. And you can see, because I think, and I'm going to be very controversial now, I think a lot of the education that is taking place at schools are outdated. It's not relevant. That's why we have structural poverty, structural unemployment, because what they are learning, they can't transfer it into the labor market. What we are teaching them, we give them a transferable skill and a skill that can generate an income for them.